my to-be mother Seema at 21, 12 years earlier, riding through the streets of London in a red double-decker bus, a banner emblazoned on its sides, visibly lesbian. The women are whistling, clapping, stomping, hanging out of windows, flashing breasts, snogging, calling out through megaphones to pedestrians and drivers, to shoppers and tourists, even to the traffic police and bobbies. Hey you, in the brown coat, in the blue jacket, in the high heels, in the uniform, in that absurd hat. Yes, you, we're talking to you. Hello, we're lesbians, we're dykes, we're butch, we're femme, we can smell your homophobia. What a day it is. They hoot and toot their way around early 1990s London. They scatter leaflets over bewildered, disapproving crowds. They descend on Marks and Spencer on Oxford Street and pose with mannequins clad in lacy underwear in the lingerie department. They take over squares and circle fountains chanting, "We're here, we're lesbians, get used to it."
Tell me about how the novel began. I believe it was with a dream that you had of the three women sitting together.
This was almost 13, 14 years ago. I was thinking about applying for an MFA. At that time, I was thinking about what stories can I write for my MFA application.
Okay.
And had worked on a couple of stories. And then one morning, this particular thing came to me. I remember waking up. The three women were very vivid in my mind. There was an initial first line. I wrote down that first line and I wrote down that scene where the three women were, two of them were sisters drinking tea. And then their dying mother was in the adjacent room. And I knew just a few details at that time. One of them was pregnant. I knew she was going to give a baby, deliver a baby very shortly. And the other was, I knew, very religious. And I knew that there was some great tension there.
Okay.
And that was all I had.
Okay.
And that's where it started from.
You worked on it for a fairly long time, over a decade, I believe. So how did that impact the writing of the novel? Because we also change as a person, the things that you're writing about changes.
The first draft took a year and a half, and that was pretty much daily writing, 3 to 4 hours a day.
Okay.
And what the first draft did for me was, in a sense, to set in stone the contours of the story.
Okay.
Like, I knew that while I was writing that the novel was going to be set in that 1 week during the delivery or just before the delivery. And so the first draft pretty much went into that week, day by day, hour by hour almost, like what happens on this day, what happens on that day. And that kind of set the contours of the story.
Okay.
What I found in the subsequent drafts was that there were certain aspects of these characters' lives that I still felt like black holes to me, that I did not know. For example, how did Seema come to this particular place in her life? How did, what is happening in the country around at that time that affected these people? So there were certain black holes that I saw in the story, and the next drafts actually tried to fill in those.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say that the story changed. I would say the story filled out.
Okay.
That the world that these characters lived in began to feel more real. I was also, I think, helped by the fact that I had set the novel at a very specific time. Even in the first draft, I had set it in 2010. Just 2 years after President Obama had elected, and he was going to run for the midterm elections again. I mean, his party was. So that was very specific. I looked very carefully at what was happening in the country around that time. And that required research that took me, I think, the next 7 or 8 years.
But I also wanted to ask you about the intersectionality. It's there in every step of the novel. You're talking about race, you're talking about gender, sexuality, politics, religion. Was that in your mind when you began?
Strictly no. I think when I had those characters, I did not know, for example, that Seema would be a lesbian when I first wrote the very first draft. When I started thinking of it as a novel, something that I may be working on for multiple years, it became kind of clear to me that I did not want to write a novel without queer characters. I'm queer and I wanted to see myself on page. And I did not feel like I could commit to a long project without something that spoke to me directly. So the queerness came from my own background, as did Islam too. The religion came because of that as well. And then as I found that the politics of the country was seeping into my novel because of I was writing about the Obama era, it was hard to not think about race. I mean, when you write about Obama, how do you ignore race? There's just no way to do that. And so that aspect of the country's history, therefore, also began to find its way into the book. So as I said, it became fuller. With each draft, it seemed like I had to go into these various things that seemed interrelated. And I could not tease out the strands completely. I could not say, look, you can look at this aspect, but not at this. And I really wanted people towards, as the book progressed, I really wanted people to not be able to tease these strands out, that you can't take just one aspect of the book and leave out the rest, that I wanted people to say, look, these are all connected.
A political novel is also a historical novel. When you're writing it, what was going through your mind?
Let me answer that by saying that when I came to the US, I mean, I came as a computer scientist. That was my background. And I came to work in the Silicon Valley, the industry. So that was one aspect of my life in the US. But another aspect was coming out as a gay man. And I did that with the help of organizations like Tricone, which were based in San Francisco at that time. And also these organizations that allowed me to be out and gay were very political organizations. I mean, they have to be out and gay was at that time a political act, and still is, I think. And so I have always been had great admiration for the kind of work that these activists did, and which I myself found a little bit on the sidelines on. I mean, I admired their work and I participated in that, but I did not really, I wouldn't have called myself an activist. I still don't call myself an activist. And so I think for me, it felt like I wanted to write something that would place that work front and center, to show my admiration as an homage to it. And so I think to make Seema a political activist, therefore became like something that I could do to as a way to allow me to take part in that as well.
A political novel is also a historical novel. So was that at the back of your mind, that whatever you're writing, whatever you're living through is history, and therefore that is a documentation that's going on in your work?
And it's something I had to embrace and allow myself to do. I mean, a political novel is sometimes hard to sell. At least that's what I found. People were like, why do you want to write about these details? Just concentrate on the characters. And I was like, but these characters our lives are very much molded by the politics that's happening around us. So how can I write about these very about these characters without all of that? And so as the book progressed, as the drafts progressed, I had to find out like what aspects of the politics actually of the political landscape actually impacted these characters, and to make sure that I held on to them. And there were, of course, the same aspects that impacted me too. For example, Obamacare, I had quit my job, which meant that I was without health insurance in America. And that became
and that's a big
important. It's a big thing. I mean, not to have health insurance is to feel completely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so that was something I just could not ignore at that point. And then there were the same-sex marriage, a fight for same-sex marriage that was going on. Many states in 2008 to 2010 were trying to ban them in their constitutions, and that would affect me. Not that I would say that my own ideas about same-sex marriage have changed over the years. I do think that marriage is an what you call not a perfect institution. It still has elements of patriarchy and heterosexuality embedded in it, and so I still have my own misgivings about it, but as a symbol of equality, it's very important.
When you went from India, for instance, were you so deeply interested in the politics here? Like, how did that mold you into the person and the writer that you are?
Being queer and being on the outside, of course, I knew when I was in India that I was queer. Especially in India, it was a very isolating experience. And I, at that time, felt that in order to come out, I had to go out of India. This is in the early 1990s, because I just did not see anyone around me. And we didn't have the internet then. And so that aspect of it, and wanting to make us visible, to make sure that queer characters have space to flourish and to be visible was very important to me. And so that's one of the reasons, as I said, I didn't think I wanted to write a novel that didn't have a queer character in it. I wanted us to be visible. And that definitely, I mean, is part of growing up in India as well. The other aspect, I think, which was also that happened around the same time when I was doing my college, I think was Babri Masjid, which was in 1992. Yes. And that set off a whole set of divisions in the country that as a Muslim I was impacted by. And to see that play out in America as well, and then now in India as well, felt like these are things that I could not ignore.
In the light of Donald Trump and everything that has happened since, there is a tendency to glorify it, right? It's the golden days, everything is possible, and you have a Black president for the first time. Your sections of the community find themselves reflected in that. Did you, looking back from the time that you began the book and when you finished it and when it came out, did you ever have revisionist tendencies?
When I started as a novel, it seemed very clear to me that a lot of Obama's promises would not come true, just because it felt like the country was getting deeper and deeper into its divisions. I think my initial drafts were quite bleak. So in the sense that I did not see how the country would come together. And of course, that played out. That played out in 2016 when Trump came up. It felt like, okay, this was what I had been fearing. But at the same time, and this is where a little bit of my own, not just revision, but learning and growth comes from, is I felt like Obama's message was needed then and is needed now. This message of coming together, because otherwise I don't see a way forward. We have to find ways in which we can work together. The divisions are not sustainable, and we have to find ways in which we can at least listen and talk to each other.